So we'll start by just talking about the candidates and how they get there. So as a person running for office, okay, and a lot of you did this extremely well when you're looking at how to win the election. What do you have to do in trying to win an election? I mean, it's a stupid way to think about it, but if you're developing a strategy, what is your goal? What is your objective?
Appeal to the most people possible.
Appeal to the most people possible. So this happens at all levels, but specific to political parties, it's broader. Okay, so let's first go back to what I was talking about with all levels. When we did our bond proposal, we met multiple times with Dr. Tuttle, Dr. Selleck, the school board. A lot of different people met, and we basically said, okay, how can we get this bond to pass? Who do we need to appeal to? Do we need to appeal to people who just graduated, get them registered? Do we need to appeal to kids or families with young children, old children? Not worry about the old people who don't have any relatives still in the public school system. We sought out coalitions even at that level. Political parties do it in a much broader way. So a coalition is the group of people that help you win. Who helps then Republicans win the election? Who helps Republicans win? Tell me one group, like a demographic, right, is a group. Who helps Republicans win? Who votes for Republicans? That's how you have to think. People. White males. Wealthy. Religious people. Those are a part of the coalition. It's not one thing that you can rely on. You have to target multiple people. You have to target multiple groups. And that really is where we start to look at the historical election stuff that we went through with the 270 to Win website. The fact that something big happened in 1860. Something big happened in 1932. And it's related to this. Because all of a sudden, the people who once were loyal to a specific party switched. They were no longer loyal. So that's where you look right here. And it comes down to party realignment and critical elections, the result of critical elections. So first, if you realign, what does that mean you do? If I'm a Democrat, I all of a sudden become a Republican. Because of what? Because I just wanted to? Nothing changed, and all of a sudden I just wanted to become a Republican? Or what did the Republican Party do? They represented me. They somehow changed their platform and appealed to me. Something that I wanted changed. So I realigned to the Republican Party. And when that happens on a significant scale, that becomes a critical election. So historically speaking, there are two huge critical elections that we talk about. And 1860 is one, 1932. What happened in those 2 years? What happened in 1860? What was the big issue? What was going on in 1860 that was bad and was going to end soon? Slavery and Civil War. The Civil War and slavery. How about 1932? What was the big deal that was going on? The Great Depression. Two huge issues that everybody was concerned about, and whatever party was able to get the most support became the winner and established some dominance. These were kind of the beginnings of parties and who they appeal to, kind of the coalitions and stuff like that. So we start with the idea of the Constitution, James Madison, all the Federalist Papers, and how bad it was to have factions and they needed to be controlled. And then all of a sudden, we have parties. We have political parties. George Washington wasn't all about them. Nobody really wanted them, but they developed because of the winner-take-all system that we have. So there was a reason for it. And then we just kind of shift, and we don't really get to the system that we know of today until 1860. And then it sets up even further into 1932. And that is, right here, how we become more conservative as Republican, more liberal as Democrats. Because of 1860. So, 1860, the Civil War, slavery. Anybody who was in favor of ending slavery all of a sudden supported Abraham Lincoln. Did it really matter what party he belonged to? No, he was a Republican, and then all of a sudden people who were anti-slavery were Republican. That was the issue. So what you have to think about then is the priority at the time was ending slavery or not. And whatever party fit the mold of what you believe was all of a sudden where your loyalty fell. Then we get another switch. 1932, the Great Depression. Herbert Hoover was a big fan of rugged individualism. Back to U.S. history, what did that mean? Individualism, which was rugged. No help from the government. Work it out, work it out. The Great Depression was a worldwide event. There was no working it out for yourself. So the people who felt that, though, followed Herbert Hoover, who was a Republican. Whereas Roosevelt felt like it was important to invest money in what we could do. Invest money in jobs, social programs, help people out. That all of a sudden appealed to those who needed the most help. The people who didn't have jobs, the people who were oppressed. We have minorities. We have laborers, workers, Southerners and Northerners. All of a sudden, it wasn't about anti-slavery or pro-slavery, and that would kind of fall in with civil rights. Like black people for a long time voted Republican. That wasn't the concern in 1932. That wasn't the priority. The priority was, in a lot of ways, as gruesome as it sounds, how do we not die? How do I provide for my family? It wasn't that blatant, but it was that serious of an issue. How do we not starve? And so the Democrats appealed more to that concern than the Republicans did. So now all of a sudden you have a shift. That's how critical elections happen. These are very much related to our political ideologies, the tendencies. African Americans vote for the Democratic Party. Why? Because they are extremely focused on what? Civil rights. It's a priority thing. The Jewish population, also overwhelmingly liberal. Oppression, similar issues there. Very similar to the ideologies, who you vote for. And it should. If you tend to be more liberal, you should probably vote for the Democratic Party. If you're more conservative, if you look at the evangelical religious aspect, more conservative, more Republican. And those are statistics that the different parties are very aware of. And that's a part of your coalition. Who are you going to target to help you win? Since, the mid-'60s, though, I kind of did our little backward track thing. We have the de-alignment that we've talked about. People fall in the middle. You don't really align anymore. And that is evident by what has happened. So, I don't know. Right now, it's starting to get tighter a little bit. It's going to be pretty interesting, probably up until Monday night. It's getting much closer and closer across the country in all states. Then, so assume, blue, red, whatever. We'll just call it purple for now. Go backwards. We've got 2 blues with Obama, then 2 reds with Bush, then 2 blues with Clinton, then 3 reds with Bush, Reagan, then Carter, blue, then I guess Ford, red, but that's really Nixon. Then we have Johnson, blue, then Kennedy, blue, then Eisenhower, red, and then all of a sudden it's blue. So this is kind of the time where there's no distinction anymore. It's kind of every election, back and forth. There's a little bit more balance. And there are a lot of reasons for it. The McGovern-Fraser Commission, the fact that the nominees now for the Democratic Party are becoming extremely liberal, forced the Republicans to also become extremely conservative. So that then causes us to split, which is why there is a little bit more of a balancing act, because it's no longer really appealing at different times. It's kind of a consistent, you're either over here or you're over here, because you don't have another option. There's nobody in the middle. Now, the other option, though, which you read about with those different articles, third parties. Do third parties run ever? Ever do they run? We have 7 different straight ticket options for parties, which means 5 of them are third parties on Michigan's ballot. So they run all the time. They run for the presidency. They run for Senate seats, House seats, state, House, state, Senate. Do they ever win? Not really. It's hard for them to win. Stuff like we talked about last week. The 2-party system, Democrats and Republicans, if they want to allow third parties, they can make the change happen. Do they ever want to relinquish any type of power that they would have, though? And that's what it would come down to. They would have to be willing to make the adjustment, and more than likely, that's not going to happen. Now, it does play a role, though. The Wall Street Journal article talked a lot about Ross Perot, about Ralph Nader, and then there are two now that really could actually hurt Donald Trump. One of them is still Gary Johnson, because he's taking a little bit less now, but around 5% of support, the polls are saying. But then also in Utah, if he loses out on those electoral votes, that's going to make it even harder for Trump to get to 270. So the third parties do play a role, but not a big one. The winner take all, it's on so many different levels. It's winner take all for the Electoral College. You take all the electoral seats within a state, and it's also winner take all for legislative positions. How many senators do you get per state? How many do you get? And those two are given to the person who wins. The loser doesn't get anything. I mean, you don't get, because you earn 49% and the other person has 50, you don't get almost half of the seats. You lose. So the third parties very seldom compete for the most votes, and they very seldom compete against either of the two parties. So the chances of them getting up to that number is very, very difficult. Now, the comparison that we've talked about for a long time, proportional representation. What is the country that I continue to go back to that had proportional representation? Germany. The Nazi Party was able to achieve more and more power because they were a third party, a very small party. I don't even know if you can consider them third parties because they had more than that anyway. But they were a minor party. Minimal support in an election. But that meant then they got a few seats. So they had a little bit of a voice in Congress. Not much, but a little bit of a voice. And that's kind of a big contrast for why we continue to be a two-party system compared to the rest of the world. So these are different labels of third parties, and some of them come up as you're going through your identifications. What do they really go after? So looking at these different parties, we have individual, ideological, one issue, and sponsored parties, okay? So we'll start with, let's say, George Wallace. George Wallace won a lot of electoral votes in the South, running based on segregation. Which one of these would George Wallace fall under then? Was he an individual personality? I know I have him up there with that, but about the segregation, that's where I'm focused. Ideological, one issue, or did he run as a sponsored party? One issue. One issue. Now, he was the governor, just like Teddy Roosevelt ran as the Bull Moose after he was president before, but it's one issue. You're gaining support solely for one issue. We've had those before where they haven't had a lot of support, but it literally means you just have one issue. Like, that is your whole focus. And it could be anything. Segregation, banning same-sex marriage. That's your one issue, and you target everybody to try to convince them to vote for you because you have one target, and that's the only thing you're going to do. Ideological, though, is much bigger. Gary Johnson is running as a libertarian because who does he agree with his views? Half, sort of Clinton, half, sort of Trump. So he has an overall platform that people listen to. Same like Jill Stein. They have an overall platform. It's not just one issue. It's just they don't fall into either category, so they have to kind of split their views. Now, the sponsored party, the UAW, going with the Democratic Party. What then does the Republican Party become related to the NRA? It's the same deal. They're a sponsored party because of the NRA. The NRA funnels thousands and thousands of dollars to each individual, millions overall. They spend a lot of money, just like the UAW does, Detroit and Flint. For a long time, Michigan has been Democratic because of the UAW. And the NRA is very similar on the other side because of the Second Amendment. All right, we are pretty much out of here. we have the fact that this critical realignment stuff comes up. I really hope that you haven't. I know some of you, I see it as I'm walking around like on your Chromebooks, 270 to win. For the next 6 days, there are going to be states that flip and go back and forth. Right now, North Carolina, Ohio, Iowa, Nevada, Florida, and there's one more that's really important. Did I say Arizona? Arizona. Those states are going to decide the election. And the fact is, what is important to them? Donald Trump is running as a Republican, but Donald Trump is also running in a lot of ways as Donald Trump. Hillary Clinton, on the other hand, she kind of has to do a little bit of competition with that, but she doesn't have the same celebrity status. So she is a little bit more reliant on the Democrats. What?
It's just Donald Trump.
It is Donald Trump, and he's able to get a lot of support because of it. And what then is the important part? The political parties try. They will continue to try, especially the county and local, the states even, looking at beyond just the president, the representatives, and the senators, because they matter. And it's also important for who wins the Senate. What is the big issue that is important for who wins the Senate right now? And we're stuck on it since last, April, I think, is when it actually happened, and nothing's happened yet. What has the Senate not done because President Obama is the one who did it? Eamon?
Elected or nominated a Speaker.
So they're a Republican Senate. Right now, the projections in the close states are leaning Democratic, which means if Donald Trump wins on Tuesday and the Senate all of a sudden becomes Democratic, the same thing's going to happen, which is absolutely awful for the Constitution. It's a bad thing. But the Democrats aren't going to just say, oh, well, we know that you didn't do it, so we'll actually approve Donald Trump's nominees. It's going to be a continual fight, and it's much more than just these states. It's also their Senate races, and that's where political parties go. Paul Ryan voted for Donald Trump. He came out and said that he voted for Donald Trump a few weeks ago. He did the early voting. But he is more supportive of the people who are running for the House seats and the Senate seats because he's more concerned about the House and winning the Senate again than he is about who wins the presidency. Not that he doesn't care, but those are his focus as the leader of the Republican Party in the House. So, any questions